my friend Ben Jacobs, who is an exceptional reporter who, if you know Ben, you know him from his work with The Guardian, with, recently with New York Magazine, where he's done exceptional work. And I'm sure some of you have read his stuff. A lot of you probably have. Ben, thanks for coming out to the Mark Thompson Show.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Oh, there he is.
Yep.
All right, Ben Jacobs, how are you? So, Ben, what's your take? We'll start with the president because that's where we started. We'll start with you with the president, then we'll get into some of what's been happening that you've been covering, that you've been hearing and feeling in D.C. But what do you make of the president's kind of exit strategy, as it were, and how the themes that he's hitting as he goes out?
I don't think it's anything particularly surprising that, this is something presidents tend to do, to go out and try to make one last play to sell themselves for history, tout their legacy, that sort of learning about the oligarchy in a tech industrial complex, seemed to be an echo of Eisenhower's military industrial complex, and trying to sort of add one last pitch to history there and, try to give himself some historical weight. Biden's someone who's always cared about his legacy, who's always paid attention to this stuff, and this is one last effort to burnish things and try to make a play for the history books to sell himself as a successful president.
Right, but I see that, but I also, what I'm remembering through this are the warnings, not the look what we've done as much. To me, unusual is even when Clinton left office and Bush was coming in, or Obama left office and Trump was coming in, and just to put it in recent history, that these kind of ominous warnings that he's talking about oligarchy and divisions and all of that. That to me seems unusual, and not that I'm judging it. I don't remember that. Do you?
No, I think it's a little bit unusual, and it sort of comes to the circumstances that Biden, of course, unlike Obama and Bush, is a one-term president. He, failed to get reelected, and first with his own campaign, and then getting a successor reelected, and dealing with the fact he's being succeeded by Donald Trump, that his campaign was based on the fact that Donald Trump was his campaign in 2020, was based on the fact that Trump was an aberration. Trump, in the political strife Trump represented, didn't represent America. And it turns out he was wrong. And Americans elected Donald Trump for the second time. And, trying to deal with that fact, because the basic premise of his presidency, that Donald Trump was an aberration, Americans wanted to return to pre-Trump times, turned out to be unsuccessful.
Do you think, that's fascinating stuff, because that's true. I mean, that Biden was wrong. Biden beat him, but Biden ended up being wrong. But is there a chance that Biden is right in that when you talk about the aberration, that this is an anomalous time or person, that do you feel that maybe he was right about the fact that we can't know that until we're post-Trump, until we see where the Republican Party goes, if this was a cult of personality and not necessarily a change in the electorate so much?
I mean, I'm certainly, that's we'll find out. There's a lot to see right now, and certainly the effects Trump has on the electorate seem to be only seen when he's on the ballot. There are a lot of voters who turn out exclusively for Donald Trump, and not for other candidates who are running on the ticket with him, as we've seen in elections. But the basic fact that Donald Trump got elected twice seems to rule things out. That it's, if something happens once, it can be dismissed, but this is now clearly part of the pattern. And even to the extent that the Republican Party, there will be a post-Trump Republican Party, it's one fundamentally formed by him, molded in his image, that every 2 years the new members of the House tend to be more Trumpy than the ones they've replaced, and more aligned with Donald Trump's values. That obviously, if you have skepticism about Donald Trump, you're not particularly inclined to run for office. If you're open about it, you're not going to be successful running for office. That it's increasingly the sense that Trump is, setting himself up to be right now, transformational figure like FDR or Reagan, and the effects he's had on American politics.
If you use that old maxim that the moment the president takes the oath of office in his second term, he's a lame duck. And when that happens, it sort of accelerates to the point when people within the president's own party start carving out ways away from him, right? We've never seen that happen successfully with Trump. Do you see that happening, as was typical, where people will be a little bolder to stand up to MAGA, to Trumpism? I mean, there's nothing that indicates to me that that would happen, but except that history has shown that it does.
No, that any efforts to build a political lane outside of Trump and to potentially succeed him certainly won't happen initially when he takes office, and will all be within the Trumpian lens. That there is, I mean, the non-MAGA Republicans don't exist anymore. That a lot of these folks, that the parties have realigned, and that there really isn't room for this. That there will be sort of variations in what they emphasize, but this is, the Republican Party in the future will be sort of, it's the Baskin Robbins version of Trumpism, the 31 flavors, and you can choose which one and which emphasis you like, be it on immigration, on foreign policy, on industrial policy, on Greenland, but that, it's all going to be different emphases. And, even the candidates who are most Trump skeptical, if you think about Nikki Haley's campaign for president last year, is still going to be within the Trumpian framework.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So tell me, you are on Capitol Hill a lot. You're speaking to some of those Republicans. The moderate Republicans, or the non-MAGA Republicans that you say don't exist, and the notion of where their party is gone. What feeling do you get from some of them in general, and not specifics, because I'm sure that's all background and off the record stuff, but people who have expressed skepticism about where their party is headed? What are they saying now?
I mean, I think this is Trump's term, and it's time to make see what happens. That this is someone who is, has won re-election, and it's a question of what policies he pursues, and it's going to be, there's sort of a question of seeing what quite is going to happen. That if you think back to 2017, Trump initially didn't really pursue the quote unquote MAGA agenda. It was sort of traditional sort of Paul Ryan Republicanism, and we're not going to see that this time. And it's a question of how that is being reshaped. And it's also worth sort of taking the step back that MAGA and moderate, this is not necessarily on an ideological scale. That some of the most Trump skeptical members of the Republican conference are sort of Tea Party types, if you think back to Chip Roy or Thomas Massie, whereas, you think about moderates from the Northeast are much more pro-Trump, representing, places like Long Island and New Jersey. So that this is not necessarily an ideological divide, but I think there's sort of a real question whether Trump benefits the second time around from knowing what he's doing, having a well thought out agenda, having teams in place, and having people who are loyal to him pursuing a Trump agenda, not a traditional Republican agenda.
Ben, talk to me, like, if you can find something to say to, a lot of members of the audience at Mark Thompson Show are, of course, not happy with the results of the election. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And there's sort of a lack of optimism about what can happen. You're there every day. What can happen? Why is there room for optimism? Why is there, or what nugget would you point to say, Democrats can make trouble here? Where can we look for that?
Look, I think right now you're dealing with a very perilous House majority for Republicans. It's down to 2 seats, and within the 219 Republicans right now, they're completely fractious. I mean, but I think the broader scheme is that, political parties and politics moves in cycles. That, Republicans were feeling hopeless around this time in 2009 after Barack Obama took office with these huge Democratic majorities. And a year and a half later, you had big Republican wave in 2010. That American politics tends to be cyclical, and there's no such thing as permanent majorities or permanent minorities. So that we'll see what happens moving forward. But American politics is by no means a static creature, as we've seen with the major realignments that have happened in Trump years. That Orange County, California, is now Democratic, and that had been, the heart of Barry Goldwater Republicanism. And Youngstown, Ohio is certainly Trumpian. That had been the basis of sort of New Deal, industrial, trade union, Democratic Party values for a better part of a century. So that all these things change and nothing is ever constant in American politics.
Um, an excellent answer. Tell me about stuff that's happening right now. These confirmation hearings. It looks as if I think when Joni Ernst, and we talked about it on the show this week, when Joni Ernst gave her support to Pete Hegseth, it gave a lot of cover to others, and it looks like Hegseth, barring anything we don't know just yet, is going to be confirmed. It looks like everyone who's come up so far is going to be confirmed. Should we be watching the Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel hearings specifically? Do you see any room for Republicans in that 53-47 Senate to have enough push against a nominee?
Certainly. And I think, remember, this is about, you need 4 Republicans. If you have 3 Republicans, it's a tie, and JD Vance can break the tie. This is a slightly different dynamic than you saw in the Trump era when the Senate Republican majority was slim and it came down to Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin potentially going in the other direction. Being in the room for the Hegseth hearing, Hegseth was sort of there to, he's certainly well prepared. He's media trained and, trying to minimize the damage. And, he's a Republican. He's a Fox News host, that there's sort of a core loyalty there, where I think the differences are going to come. We're going to see both with Tulsi Gabbard and with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because they're not Republicans, that there's not the rally around the flag situation. They're still coming, recent converts, and, not being picked as sort of nods towards bipartisanship, but being picked as sort of these folks who have these MAGA credentials. And I think there are real concerns with both of them, that, there's certainly concerns about Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy views from sort of traditional establishment foreign policy Republicans, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that, he is a Republican nominee to be Secretary of Health and Human Services for the president who, got Roe v. Wade overturned, and he's pro-choice. And there's real concern from sort of pro-life social conservatives about this. And I think that's really where the tensions are, that, there are certainly other concerns Democrats have with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., certainly all his views on vaccines, but it's, which will factor into Republican concerns too. But what changes this is that he is a recent convert, that he has MAGA credentials, as does Tulsi Gabbard, but not Republican credentials.
And one, just a little more on Kash Patel. Where do you see that going? Do you see, a lot of people think that, okay, we can suffer Pam Bondi, we can suffer a lot of the people who, who watch this show, and a lot of Democrats, we can suffer some of the predictable Republicans that are going to come before this. But this Kash Patel, he has an enemies list. He wrote a book about it. He is someone who we really don't want him around the barn. How do we look at that? And is there a way that he doesn't? I mean, are there enough Republicans, do you think, who've been skeptical of his nomination?
I think there need to be 4 Republicans, and part of it is that there has been less focus on Patel's nomination in recent weeks and months, just with everything going on. Some of it, if something happens during the hearings, but as of now, you need 4 Republicans to break against party lines. For someone who has been a loyal Republican foot soldier on this stuff for a while. And that's probably not likely to happen. There's certainly the possibility, that unlike Hegseth, Kash Patel is certainly a less polished figure. There's questions about what, anything else that could come out in the process of vetting. But this is a top priority for Trump. This is someone who's loyal to Trump, and that it would require a lot of political capital for something like this.
53-47, the Democrats still have Chuck Schumer leading their caucus in the Senate. Generally speaking, I mean, people are seeing that, again, this is a part of the old guard of Democratic politics. Are there now people talking about new leadership in the Senate for the Democrats, whispering about who might be that person to fight harder in a way from the minority than Chuck Schumer might be able
Certainly
to.
not at this point. And I don't know if there's sort of much other options about fighting harder in terms of, there's obviously all the legislative tactics you can do that, it's a question whether fighting harder means being more strident on MSNBC, which there's certainly people who could do that. But I don't know how effective that would be.
Mark Johnson show, or on the Mark Johnson show. Yeah, okay. So I see that. And I just wonder, because I see, the new guard of John Thune, who's not 25 years old, but and Mike Johnson, who is also not 25, but there's been some more turnover over there. And you look at the Democratic bench, even though Hakeem Jeffries is there, but you still see some of the older familiar faces leading the Democrats, and wondering if that is part of a plan that you've heard about. But yeah, that wouldn't happen, I would guess, until later, and no one would want the job unless they knew that they could make some hay at 53-47. It's kind of hard.
No, I think that's certainly difficult. And Thune had been in the Senate for 20 years and been in leadership, and Mike Johnson's elevation happened under circumstances which can charitably be described as unusual.
Right. And how secure is he? Like, is he somebody who should, when sometimes a player gets traded and they say rent, don't buy, is he somebody who should be renting and not buying?
I mean, his gavel is because of the support of Donald Trump. It's not because of anything at his point, and that once there's any wavering, that's gone. That Johnson's in a tenuous situation with a relatively impossible job to perform, and it's just a question of if Trump, for some reason, the White House decides they could do better than him, he's gone. That Donald Trump was the one who got everyone over the line. It was Donald Trump's last minute lobbying that got Johnson elected a couple weeks ago, and that there's enough skeptics of any speaker from sort of the Freedom Caucus, hard right of House Republicans, that it's with a majority of 30, it's not an easy job, let alone a majority of 2.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I noticed also something that I hadn't heard a speaker say before. We'll let you go in a second. But when Mike Turner, as the chair of the Intelligence Committee, was let go or demoted by Mike Johnson, Johnson was quick to point out that this was not from Trump. This was from the House, which I've never heard a speaker say that before. The speaker usually speaks from a place of power.
Certainly, yeah, and Judge Johnson's not coming from a place of power. And Turner said that Johnson had told him it come from Mar-a-Lago, and that sort of speaks to the difficulty of this stuff, because this is something he did after dragging out the process, sort of springing it on when it was not expected. And now you have Mike Turner discontented, and with a perilously thin majority, that any one unhappy person, any malcontent, can make your job impossible.
Yeah. And I think that's why Turner knows that it was not Johnson doing this. It was Johnson, being the hatchet guy. It's sort of like George Steinbrenner's managers, right? Whatever they did was because George wanted it done. And it feels like that.
Well, yeah, though I feel like Mike Johnson doesn't quite have Billy Martin's personality.
No, he doesn't. More of a Bob Lemon type, maybe. So, Ben, before I let you go, huge Ravens fan, Ravens season ticket. We've exceeded our sports talk on this show, but where are you going to be watching the game, and what's your prediction?
Just on my couch, and it'll be a good game, and we'll see what the weather looks like in Buffalo. It's the likely MVP in Lamar Jackson and another good quarterback in Josh Allen. So we'll see what happens.
So diplomatic, man. So diplomatic. Ben Jacobs, we can read what he does so well in New York Magazine and other places. Look for him, follow him on X and anywhere else, Blue Sky. And thanks for taking time to be on the Mark Thompson Show and sharing what's happening in DC ahead of the inauguration. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.